So we're very fortunate tonight to have Michael Heumann, who has helped us with other programs in the past, extremely knowledgeable about Native American affairs. He has a degree in law. He practices law in many areas, including consulting in art, and was the chairman of the board of the Southwest Museum and oversaw the merging with the Autry Museum. So without further ado, Michael Heumann, please.
Thank you, Ed. And I want to thank Pablo for putting together the PowerPoint slideshow, which was beyond my technical capabilities, and everybody else who pitches in to put these programs together. Several of you have helped get set up tonight, and thank you very much. Let me start by just a few comments how I got into collecting Native American Indian art and why. I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I had an uncle, and I was like 4 or 5 years old, and I would go to his home, and he had two small collections, and one of them was stone artifacts, which were mound builder artifacts from southwest Ohio, near a place called Fort Ancient. And those were collected by his great-grandfather in the 1850s. Then he had about 20 pieces of pottery. Pardon me? Good, okay. He had about 20 pieces of pottery on a shelf that his father had collected as about 20 years old when his father went with his grandmother on a train trip where they passed through Albuquerque, and he bought, in 1900, he bought these 20 pieces of pottery. Now, when I was maybe 50, I inherited all these things, but by then, I had long ago started collecting the kind of things you see on the shelves, and this is a small part of it. And the way I got started collecting, I thought all this stuff was in museums. But in 1981, I went skiing in Mammoth. And on the way up, I stopped in Lone Pine at Lorena's Rock Shop. And I went in, and there were 3 Indian baskets there. I bought 2 of them, and I realized, wow, this stuff can be found. I later pretty quickly became aware you could find it at Indian shows of people with Indian material culture artifacts at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium twice a year, Pasadena twice a year. And then I found out that you could find things in garage sales and estate sales and antique stores and galleries and auctions. And so I collected a fair amount starting in 1981. And if you collect a fair number of things for 45 years, it adds up. And so what I'm going to do is give you sort of a show, a walk-through curated show of Indian art of the Americas, North America, that you could have seen the equivalent of it in museums around the United States until about a year ago. But now you cannot. And why? Because under the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act of 1990, there's a requirement to return certain pretty narrowly described areas of things to Indian peoples. Things like human remains, affiliated funerary objects, unaffiliated funerary objects, and objects of cultural patrimony, one other category. But and that is sort of defined. But a year ago, there was a new set of NAGPRA regulations adopted, a little more than a year ago, back at the end of the Biden administration. And these regulations added a requirement that has caused most museum exhibits of Native American material culture to close down. The requirement is, if you're going to show things that even arguably might possibly be, let's say, objects of sacred patrimony, you must consult with the tribe of which you're going to show the piece. So if you want to do an exhibit like you could have seen at the Heard Museum or the Field Museum in Chicago, or you now have to, if you want to do an exhibit that has things from 70 tribes, you have to consult with 70 tribes first. And that costs time and money, and museums are not doing it. So the only way you can really see what you're going to see here is in private collections. Now, what I'm going to do, give you a sense of where we're going. We're going to talk about where Indian peoples lived in the Americas and how many different peoples there were. And then we're going to look at the material culture or art created by various of these peoples. We're going to start in eastern Canada, work our way west into Alaska, come down through Oregon. Then we're going to jump over and cover a little bit of the Plain States in the Southwest. Then we're going to come to California, and eventually we're going to come to essentially where we live, which is Chumash territory. And so let's get started. Let's go next slide. This is a map that just shows sort of big categories of different sort of groups of many tribes that are somewhat affiliated. Each different color represents something like the Southwest, the Southeast, the Northern, the Plains, and such. Next slide, please. Now, this is a listing of some of the tribes that live in those areas, but it's only a short list because you could make a list like this about 900 different groups of people long. And there's some areas, such as far northern California, where literally if you go from one valley to the next, you discover different peoples. Now, when I say they're different peoples, there's often relationship, tribe to tribe. Always there's been the melting pot. People, meet and have families with people other than from their immediate own people from time to time, and that happens in many ways. But there are very distinct, tribal entities, and there were about 900 of them. And when I say were, there still are many of them in various degrees of survival. You look at the Navajo or Hopi, and there's many, many people of those tribes that are, very much of a cultural continuity. But then you look at peoples like a lot of the California tribes, which were so impacted and devastated by Euro-American, by us coming in, that some tribes really don't exist anymore. Many others exist, but through people with some ancestry of a particular tribe, and they identify with that tribe, but they may also have a lot of other ancestries, much like the rest of us Euro-Americans, where we often can say, oh, I have some German ancestors, I have some British ancestors, oh, by the way, somebody from Scotland and somebody from Spain or something too. So again, it's sort of a melting pot sense. Next slide, please. So then we get into California, and this map gives some sense by a lot of names of some, but not all, of the many Indian peoples in California. Next slide, please. And then I bring it down to where we are, the Chumash, and the Topanga and the Tataviam are nearby too. But looking at the Chumash, we see in the lower map several groupings of Chumash. But with the Chumash, there's the federally recognized Santa Ynez Band, but there are about 9 or 10 other bands of Chumash that are not recognized by the federal government. They are recognized by California. And I find this sort of anomalous in that the very federal government, which had some very harsh policies towards Native American Indians, in some cases amounting to expulsion or worse, it's this federal government that decides whether an Indian tribe is recognized as such. for many legal reasons, including having rights under the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act. But California, under what's called CalNAGPRA, California Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, recognizes many of the California tribes that the federal government does not. An interest in legal questions there: did the federal government preempt the area, and is the California statute really legally valid or not? But that hasn't been litigated yet. Then the map at the top has a lot more names that are in print too small for you to read. Those are different villages, some of them, of Chumash people before the Spanish came in and settled this area. And it probably doesn't capture all the villages, but it captures an awful lot of them. And each of those, in a sense, are, they probably thought of themselves as separate peoples, although they could speak the same language and understand each other. Next slide, please. And then I have just a couple slides about a book that many of you probably have. And if you don't, you should have it. I saw a couple of copies back on the table there, the Topanga Story. And this book has a really good treatment of Chumash and Tongva history right here in the Topanga area. Next slide, please. And this is just the beginning page on the first inhabitants of Topanga. Now with Topanga, there were a number of village sites right here in Topanga, one of them right in downtown Topanga, the village center, another right down at the ocean where Topanga Creek runs into the ocean. There used to be a big mound there. It was destroyed many, many decades ago by both people digging into it and then eventually construction of PCH. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to start the journey across Canada. And you're going to see by all the slides you see after this how incredibly different the pieces look. And people who study these cultures and the things Indian peoples make, they can identify just by a quick glance where something is from, what tribe it relates to, and sort of what it reflects. For me, collecting pieces like this it's first of all having a physical object. You can pick up a basket like this, and I'll describe why I call it a basket in a minute, and you can feel its weight, you can feel its texture. You appreciate it so much more than if you see it behind glass in a museum storage, in a display case. And when you look at a basket like this, you immediately say, it's Micmac from the seacoast of eastern Canada. And the materials it's a particular structure that tells you it's a couple hundred years old, because that's about when they stopped making them like this. And it's bark wrapped around the sides, but the light features you see are all porcupine quills. And we'll see a lot of porcupine quills in some other artifacts that come from the northern reaches of North America. And so to put these porcupine quills in here, you had to find a porcupine, you had to kill it, and you had to pluck the porcupine needles, which you had to do carefully, or else you got stuck. And then you had to flatten them, and you had to dye them, and then you wove them into designs such as this. Next slide, please. Now this is a slightly more recent basket, but the same Micmac culture. But now we're seeing Euro-American influences. The earlier one was just geometric shapes. This one we have floral designs, which reflect what Indian peoples in the East Coast were seeing of, of things that people brought from Europe. And sometimes that would be clothes, sometimes it would be embroidered things, sometimes it would even be ceramics brought from Europe. But otherwise, so this basically says Micmac, but about 50 years more recent, maybe mid-1800s. Next slide, please. Now we move a little bit west into Quebec, but in the interior of Quebec. And these pieces are influenced by contact with the French first and eventually the British when they took over Canada. And here we have the middle one. I don't think you can see it too well, but it has two beavers on it. But the middle one, the beavers are in porcupine quill. But the material used for the design on the front and the back boxes are moose hair, dyed moose hair woven into the birch bark. These are all of birch bark because that's a very accessible material in Quebec. Next slide, please. So, and speaking of birch bark, this is a model canoe of the type that the Native Americans in Eastern Canada used at the time of contact, and which the French fur traders readily adopted as the far and away best way to canoe up and down the rivers and through the Great Lakes. And this model is about 44 inches long. It's about 1/4 of full size. It's about it came out of a hunting lodge in Oregon, of all places, where somebody had acquired it long before. And you probably have seen little tourist birch bark canoes that are about 4 inches long and that are just basically very simply put together. But this one is put together in a way that would reflect a real full-size canoe. All the work throughout it is what you would see in a real full-size canoe. And by the way, of these canoes, older full-size canoes don't, there aren't too many of them around. We tended not to collect the really big things, but there are some examples. Next slide, please. Then we get into something else that began to happen. This is probably a gibway. It's beaded. And so we're no longer seeing the porcupine quills or the moose hair. We're seeing beads. Now, where did the beads come from? Anybody know? Venice, Czechoslovakia. They're trade beads. And these particular beads, people who study these kinds of things, they would know these are seed beads, which is a certain smaller side than pony beads. And these probably, just by the beads used and the colorations, you can tell it's probably about turn of the century, 1900. It's what's called a bandolier bag, and it's probably a gibway, which is, these people lived in Canada over towards the Great Lakes. And so again, we're moving west through Canada. And these bags were part of regalia that would be used along with other highly beaded clothes in dances and such, going back going back about 150 years for using these kind of bags. Next slide, please. Now this piece is something I found very recently, of all places, on eBay. And it doesn't show too well in a photograph, but it's much, much older than the bandolier bag you saw. It's probably early 1800s. And it's the fringe on the bottom, about half of the fringe on the bottom is moose hide, and the other half of the fringe is probably caribou or possibly deer. And the top part is hide, and then the beaded elements are, again, the seed beads that came from Europe. But what's really interesting to me about this piece is the two circles at the top. And they have holes in the middle of them through which to string a strap and wear this as sort of a purse with the strap over your shoulder. And this is really the predecessor of what became just, two types of bags from the later 1800s, of which there are numerous examples. Some are called fire bags, and then some of them developed with replacing the fringe with about 4 sets of hanging beaded sort of pendants at the bottom. And those kind of bags are called octopus bags, and they spread all the way from the Great Lakes westward through Canada into Alaska. So you find those kind of bags all over the place, but they all originated from this type of early bag, of which, in going through numerous books that I have on this subject, I haven't found any of them on leather the way this is. They're usually on cloth. Next slide, please. Okay, now these, and by the way, that last piece was Cree. This is a pair of gauntlets or gloves, probably Cree, but it may be what are called Metis. Metis are a large population of people in the sort of the mid-Atlantic or middle states of Canada, middle provinces. And the Metis are the descendants of the very early fur traders who went west and met Indian women, and they had families, and their children are Metis, in a sense, half Indian, half Euro-American. And those children had their children and their children, and there was actually a rebellion in Canada in, I think it was about the 1860s, the Riel Rebellion of Metis people rebelling against the Canadian government. But what I love about these is the ribbon work that is worked into the designs in a beautiful way. And one thing you'll see through a whole lot of this is the celebration of color, of design, of artistry. And mostly Indian peoples decorated utilitarian objects or any objects, and they decorated them sort of with a high artistic sensibility. You don't see very many poorly done pieces. You might distinguish between very good and great, but you don't see anything much below very good, especially with older pieces. Next slide, please. Now I decided just to stop and say, well, there are artifacts of people who were here before the Euro-Americans arrived, and those are archaeological materials. And this particular box of various types of materials, this came from the uncle I mentioned, from his great-grandfather, and they come from southeast Ohio. But you find projectile points and spear points and tomahawk heads and such in an archaeological setting all over the Americas. And some of them are fairly similar all over the Americas. For example, Folsom points from about 10 or 11 years ago are a particular recognizable form of a projectile point, of a spear point, that is found pretty much over most of the United States. Next slide, please. And I just singled out two particular stone artifacts that from my collection. One on the left is, you can just see the incredible sculptural element of this. You know, it's how does somebody take a piece of stone, a raw piece of stone, and turn it into that shape? And there's an awful lot of work that goes into that, using other stones to abrade the stone, maybe to chip pieces off and eventually to polish it and refine it into this rather elegant shape. Now, the one on the right is a really special piece. It doesn't show up well in the photograph, but it's a It's a piece that you hold in your hand. It's got 2 grooves for 2 fingers, and it's probably a chopping stone of a kind, but at the top of it is a carving of the head of a mountain sheep. Next slide, please. You can maybe make it out a bit, but you can see the mountain horn coming around and sort of an ear in the center, and then the mountain sheep head in the front. If we actually were holding the real thing, you could see that a whole lot better. Next slide, please. Oh, and by the way, that last piece I showed you with the mountain sheep head, that's probably from Columbia River area. Now this basket is also wonderful because these baskets, when you see them in galleries or trade shows or whatever, they're almost always they're said to be from maybe 1860 to 1880. And they're from back northeast. They're splint baskets, hickory splint baskets. And everybody looks at them and says, who thinks they know what they're saying, they're from 1860 to 1880. And often they have designs stamped on them with stamps often made out of potatoes. You know, you stamp a design again and again. You can see that. But how old is this basket really? Well, in a very, very few of these baskets, of which I have 2, the people who bought the basket lined it with newspaper. Next slide, please. And in this case, they lined it with newspaper that if I get there with a magnifying glass and read some of those things, I find the newspapers dated from 1818 to 1821. And so it's not 1860 to 1880, it's 40 years older than that. And I've long thought, even before I found these baskets, that they were a lot older. This one, based on the newspaper, is from Auburn, New York. And next slide, please. And in this slide, this is an incredibly sort of jarring graphic article that I found pasted inside this blanket that is sort of a reflection of abolitionist sentiment in New York in 1821. And basically, I'm going to see if I can read it. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It tells the story of a black person, an African-American person, who committed suicide. And in just a sentence or 2, it says how terrible that a person would be driven to that by the way they're treated. So I've never in any other Indian artifact I have discovered such a remarkable piece of history that way. Next slide, please. These 3 bags might have come from or very near to Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls was a trade hub for Indian artists to have a market to sell to Euro-Americans traveling to Niagara Falls back in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and up through the early 1900s. And so these bags would be of Iroquois people, the 6 or 7 nations of the Iroquois. And, but they're early, especially the 2 on the right, are probably from 1820 to 1840. The one on the left, more 1850s or 1860s. The one on the left I took to, especially because of the 2 birds on it. Next slide, please. Now here we have bags, but now we've jumped way to the west. We've jumped to Alaska and the west coast of Alaska, and now we use the materials we have. These are caribou hide, the 2 bags on the left, and the lower one is actually in a book published about 60 years ago with this particular bag illustrated in the book. So, what materials do you have on the west coast of Alaska? Not many trees. You have grasses, you have driftwood, and you have the animals you hunt, which include a lot of caribou, but also hunting seals and walruses and such. But so these two bags reflect the materials available. Now on the right, we have a three-pronged implement that you hold in your hand. Now what would that be? It's a tool, but it's a hunting tool. And on the tips of this, and we'll see a close-up a bit later, are three toenails attached to this wooden implement by sinew from where muscle attaches to bone in, maybe in this case, a caribou, or maybe a seal. But the three toenails at the end are seal toenails. And what would happen is a hunter would creep up to a breathing hole in the ice where seals would come up to breathe, hoping to harpoon one, and they would scratch on the edge of the ice with this implement with the seal toes, and that would lure the seals into thinking it's pretty safe. There's another seal up there already. And from there, we see what transpires. Next slide, please. Now these implements are made out of driftwood, probably in the northern part of the west coast of Alaska. Well, actually not that far north. Let's just say west coast of Alaska. They are Yupik Eskimo, and you can't really see it in the photographs, but the bowl has two images of caribou, and each caribou has a lance coming up from its back. In other words, this represents a scene of hunting. And the bowl of the spoon, again, on the photograph you can't see it, but if you see it close up, has the skeletal image of a bird, and it's a big round bird, almost the shape of a turtle or something, but it has a head and a tail and two legs. And within the bird and within the two caribou, there is an intestinal tract represented. And that's a particular depiction that you tended to see on things like this from about 1860 to 1875. And the Smithsonian has a number of examples of this, but they're pretty rare. And by the way, it's dyed red. That dye, where do you get red dye if you're up on the west coast of Alaska? It's basically blood with a mordant used as a dye. Next slide, please. Now we get to what are you wearing if you're up on the west coast of Alaska? You're a Yupik Eskimo. You wear boots. And what do you make your high boots with? You make them with whatever materials you have. Sometimes they're made of seal fur, seal skin, sometimes caribou. This particular set, and I don't know you'll be able to make it out, but let's look at a close-up next. Next, please. This is actually salmon skin. These are salmon skin boots. So some Eskimos had probably a very good salmon dinner, but they used the skin too. Next slide, please. Now we're back to hunting those seals. You use your seal scratcher and you attract a seal to come up to the blowhole, and you have a harpoon, and this harpoon point is attached to your harpoon, and you have this line, and at the far end of the line you have a tooth which allows you a handle to hold on to the other end of the line. So you harpoon the seal, and the seal dives, and the line plays out, and then it's sort of equivalent to playing a fish. You pull and tire out the seal and eventually pull the seal up, and this is how you eat. Next slide, please. Well, this is the close-up I mentioned of the seal toenails attached to this implement with sinew. Next slide, please. And so you also are going to make baskets. Baskets are very useful in all cultures to store things in. You know, we have baskets. But how do you make your basket on the west coast of Alaska? You make it with grasses. But you want to decorate your basket. So what are the colored materials there? Those are dyed seal intestine, strips of dyed seal intestine. And so that's how you add some color to your basket. Next slide, please. Now we're going to move down to Southeast Alaska. How many of you have ever been to Southeast Alaska? Okay, very few. I get there often because I have two brothers who live in Juneau. And my wife and I have spent over 3 years on trips of 1 or 2 or 3 weeks to Alaska. And we've been all over Alaska, you know, down to Dutch Harbor in the halfway down the Aleutians, or I once took a raft trip for 10 days in the Brooks Range and saw grizzly bears and caribou and wolves and gyrfalcons and peregrine falcons and such. But this is down, this blanket is from the Tlingit people in Southeast Alaska. And this is woven from a pattern board painted by a man. The woman weaves the blanket in the pattern on the pattern board, and she weaves it out of mountain goat wool and cedar bark. Now you have to collect the mountain goat wool. Sometimes you hunt the mountain goat, or you go up in the spring when the mountain goats rub against bushes to shed their winter coat, and you go up and pick up the fluffy hide, the fur they left behind, and you weave, and it takes wool from a couple mountain goats to weave a blanket like this, and it takes, if you're a Tlingit weaver and you weave a blanket like this, it takes you about a year to weave it, and it is a cape. It's a dance cape. They're called Chilkat blankets after the tribe where most of them were woven. This one, the pattern board, is in the Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria on Vancouver Island, but and probably several blankets were woven from that same pattern board over a period of about 80 years before the pattern board ended up in a museum collection. I think this is the oldest one woven from that pattern board. And down below, and I took the picture for the Chilkat blanket, but how many of you have ever heard of a mohawk haircut? The older people here probably have. Well, the mohawk haircut, it was kind of a somewhat popular hairstyle about 70 years ago with, you know, boys that would be given mohawk haircuts if they weren't given a crew cut. But what's the inspiration of a mohawk haircut? You can see to the left that piece hanging down. It's made of horsehair, and it's also got porcupine weaving in the center of it, and that is the inspiration for the mohawk haircut. That's a hairpiece that Iroquois and other northeastern Indians would wear 150 years ago. I could talk about more things, but I'm going to go to the next slide because we have to keep moving. Next slide, please. So that we're still back with the Tlingit Indian culture, Southeast Alaska. This is a box, and it's made out of cedar. But if you're going to make a box out of cedar wood, you're going to decorate it. And so you carve it with a totemic image, and we see that on the front. And then on both sides, you see one side here is another painted image that is not carved, but is just painted. And by the way, to the left of that, you see another of these Yupik Eskimo baskets. Okay, And this, by the way, this was once owned by a territorial governor of Alaska in about 1906 to 1913. That's when he was the governor. And it ended up in a California collection. Then somebody took it back up to Juneau to sell, and I found it there, and I brought it back to California. So it's a traveling trinket box. Okay, next slide, please. And this is, you know, you're a Tlingit Indian, you need footwear. So this is a set of moccasins. Again, if you're going to wear footwear, you decorate it. So we see really wonderful beadwork designs on the shoes that probably some woman wore, probably nicer occasions, or maybe every day, I'm not sure. And by the way, on brain-tanned hide, which everything you're seeing is on brain-tanned hide, if it's hide. And this is sort of diagnostic. You know that if it has that particular coloration of yellow beads, it's probably from about 1880 to 1900, mustard yellow. And the red beads that you see beside the yellow beads have white centers. They are sometimes called white heart red beads. Again, went out of use about 1900. So that gives you a sense of the age of these moccasins. And we see a little bit of fur ruff going around the back. But to me, just beautiful works of art, as well as utilitarian footwear. Next slide, please. Okay, and I think this might be our last Tlingit slide. I love Tlingit work, in case you can't tell. The Tlingit had clans and houses, and they were very, very conscious that you could not marry somebody from your same clan. You had to marry somebody from the opposite clan. If you were, of the wolf or bear clan, you had to marry an eagle clan person. And then often things they made would have clan figures. And so here we see the eagle on the left, also a butterfly below that. And on the right, we see a frog, and there were frog clans within the bigger groups that could intermarry. So these are maybe made, and by the way, above the frog is a duck, but these are maybe made for sale in commerce to people like us in around 1900, but they often were kept within the culture and used within the homes of Tlingit people themselves, or shown during big gatherings, potlatches. Next slide, please. And, I'm not done with Tlingit. Baskets. I love this little basket because what is the most common fish to eat in Alaska? It's salmon. So here we have a basket with the salmon woven on this side and the other side, just sort of a beautiful artistic rendering. Next basket, please. And we have butterflies up in Alaska too, so let's show that. Let's make a basket with butterflies in it. Next slide, please. And this basket is older than the other two. This basket is probably 1860s or 70s. It's likely from Yakutat, Alaska. The particular designs indicate that. That's the northernmost Tlingit village in Alaska. And this shows sort of the more abstract designs that were used earlier on. And it's a big, big basket it's maybe about 11 inches tall. It's a berry basket, berry picking basket. Next slide, please. Now, this is still Alaska, but it's very far south in southeast Alaska in a village of Tsimshian people. And this village relocated in the 1870s from British Columbia. It's called New Metlakatla. And so if you see a basket, almost all of these, and this is Those earlier baskets were made out of spruce root, the Tlingit baskets. This is cedar bark. And this basket I love because of the sense of humor. First of all, and it says where it's from. I don't know if you can make it out, but reading from left, it's A-L-A-S-K, and then around the bend, A, Alaska. So we know where it's from. But if in 1890 you take a steamship up to Alaska, what do you want to bring back? Next slide, please. You want to bring back, and again, I know it's hard to make out from afar with the photographs, so I'll spell it out. S-O-U-V-E-N-I-R. This woman in New Metlakatla, Shimshin woman, said, "I'll make a souvenir for you to take home." So next slide, please. Then we get down into British Columbia, Kwakiutl or Kwakwak peoples. And I love this particular mask. It's so strong. You know, it's not a smiley mask. It's not a smiley face. It's a pretty stern face. And it was once in a Hudson Bay Company trading post. And at that time, it's got a little stamp on the back of it that says it's a Hudson Bay Trading Company stamp, and it's got the price on the back, $25, once upon a time. And you can see a little bit, by the way, you just see a little bit, in the upper left-hand corner is a mask that's called a cornhusk mask. That's back Iroquois, New York State. And there are a couple other artifacts, but it's really the mask I wanted to show. Next slide, please. Now we're still in Kwakiutl territory, British Columbia, south of Alaska, and this is another of those wood boxes. It's a bent wood box. The entire side, the four sides, are made out of one piece of wood, not four pieces of wood constituting the four sides. And the one piece of wood is grooved and then steamed and bent to create right angles. So you bend the wood and bring it around and then where the two ends meet of the four sides, you stitch it together with, you may nail it together with nails, you may stitch it together with spruce root. And this one, you actually, if you look real carefully, you can see what are probably wooden pegs that hold it together. Then it's got a bottom, and the top is diagnostic. It's that rim at the back screams out to all of us, Kwakiutl. And then it's got a wonderful bear face on the front. Next slide, please. Now this, how does this strike you? This is called a welcome figure. It's to make you feel welcome when you arrive in Kwakiutl territory. But it's not just a completely smiley, friendly welcome. It's a pretty stern welcome. You're welcome, but you better behave. And this is several feet tall. It's in a can painted black, a Maxwell coffee can, and it's got styrofoam peanuts in it because it stood in the ground for decades and its bottom rotted out, so it needs help to stand up. And so that's our welcome figure. Next slide, please. And now we're getting down a little bit south. We're getting to the very south, to the west coast of Vancouver Island, or the very, very northwest part of the Olympic Peninsula. And two peoples that are really the same people live in those locations. They're the Nootka people of the west coast of Vancouver Island and the Makah people of northwest Olympic Peninsula, but they speak the same language. They're often referred to collectively as West Coast peoples. And they made a lot of baskets, and they learned that people in Victoria, in British Columbia, and in Seattle loved to buy baskets and take them home. So they made lots of baskets. And this one in particular I love. It's a really good rendering of a bald eagle. And it's Nootka or macaw. Next slide, please. Now, this one I just wanted to demonstrate that I think we all know that up in the areas we're talking about now, they had totem poles. And the great carvers of totem poles in the mid to late 1800s would carve full-size poles that you would see in villages, sometimes 20, 30, 40, 50 feet tall, but they would also carve miniatures. And especially in the early days, the miniatures were so true to form that you could recognize the exact full-size totem pole of which the miniature was carved. And I took a liking to these and collected a lot of these miniature totem poles. And then below that, we have, to the left, we have 2 birch bark baskets, and then to the right, we have a couple of northeast baskets. And below that, you see one shelf of about, 25 shelves of books. So I have over 1,000 books on Native American material culture. And it's by poring through those books that I can figure out what I have and what it is, and what its context is. And by the way, I'll stop and mention another reason that I love this art. It's not only the physical object to hold and appreciate and feel the weight and the texture of, it's windows into culture. What were the people who made these? How did they live? What were their lives like? It's windows into relationships with other peoples. Where did those beads come from? How did they get to the Indian people and get woven into an artifact? And they're pieces of history. They're the side of Indian people's side of the history where we tend to know the Euro-American side a whole lot better. We know about, Western, settling the West, moving west, colonizing. But for the Indian peoples, they were the sort of recipients of us moving west. They were impacted by us moving west, often very terribly. In Northern California, in the 1860s and 70s, we had bounties on scalps of Indian people. We would pay money for that. And so there are books written about that are about, one of them is titled The American Genocide, which is doing that to Indian peoples. And by the way, just sort of talking about that impact, and if we want to be real about it, when the missions were founded, the Indian peoples who were brought to the missions were not brought there voluntarily. And they built the missions and built the outbuildings and tilled the fields, but they weren't just doing it voluntarily. They had a different life that they had been pretty accustomed to living. It was really, if you want to get right down to it, it was slavery. We're all aware of African American slavery in America, but there was also another form of slavery in America. Okay, next slide, please. Now we're going to come down into a little bit of the interior of British Columbia, Thompson River. This is a Thompson River Salish basket with a lot of design in it. Next slide, please. And just down from the Thompson River is the Fraser River, Thompson River being a tributary. This is a Fraser River lidded basket, and the coloration comes from cherry bark that is used to imbricate the surface of the coiled basket. Coiled basket, I say. Some baskets we see are coiled. These are coiled, the last two. Those Tlingit and macaw and Nootka baskets were twined baskets. It's a totally different technology of making a basket. Maybe we'll see more of that. Next slide, please. So this is another coiled baskets. This is now into Washington State, Cowlitz, C-O-W-L-I-T-Z, sort of close to where the Columbia River empties into the Pacific, but a bit north. And by the way, sort of poking up in the back is a several-foot tall totem pole of a raven. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a Klickitat basket from further up the Columbia River. And Klickitat baskets very frequently have 4, 5, 6, 7 of these loops at the top. And they're often broken, so I'm somewhat selective. I try to get better examples of what I collect. And again, if you collect over 45 years, I'm patient. If I sort of see something that I think ought to fill a gap in my collection, I wait until a good example comes up. And often I wait until it comes up for a reasonable price, because what is the price structure? It starts with what I call picker prices, the prices the pickers pay when they find something out of context at a garage sale or something. And the pickers go and they sell on a wholesale basis what they find to dealers. So you have picker prices, then you have dealer prices, then you have higher dealer prices, then you have Santa Fe prices. So I don't buy in Santa Fe very often. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, these are probably Nez Perce. Most of these bags are Nez Perce. They can be Cayuse or other neighboring tribes, Cayuse, Wasco, but upper Missouri and sort of where the Snake River comes in to the Missouri and over into not just Oregon, but over into Idaho. So Nez Perce corn husk bags. So they're made out of hemp, but then the weft part, the part you can see on top of the hemp, is corn husk. It's sort of the straw colored. And then the design colors are made sometimes from dyed corn husk and sometimes yarns. Probably the one on the left has dyed corn husk and it's pretty faded, but the ones in the middle have yarn woven into them. And the ones in the middle were rather clearly made for sale to us because they have things that the makers think we might respond to, you know, roses or Christmas trees. But the bags they make for themselves usually have geometric figures like the one on the left or the one on the right. Next slide, please. Now, this is a very old artifact. It's a wallet. And when I say it's a wallet, it's carved out of an elk horn, and the slot leads in. You can just maybe make out that there's a slot along the top. The inside is hollowed out, and the money stored in it would be dentillium. And one of you in the audience is wearing a hoopah necklace with dentillium shells. Dentillium shells were money back then, so that's why this is a purse. It's a money purse. And dentillium shells were collected mostly off of British Columbia from about 20, 30, 40 feet depth. And they were harvested by rakes out of canoes, and they were pulled up, and they were used as money, and they were traded to other peoples all the way down to California and all the way east, all the way into the Plains states. So sometimes you find a Plains Indian woman dress decorated with dentillium shells from off the coast of British Columbia. And this particular piece it has, on either end of it, it has a round circle of abalone shell inserted. So it's just it's a wonderful piece. Next slide, please. And by the way, that was probably Yurok or Karuk or Hoopah, that money piece. Now we're going to jump over to the plains, just briefly, but we see more of the trade beads. And the moccasins to the left are probably northern Arapaho, somewhere up east of the Rockies, sort of roughly where Denver is, where the Platte River begins. And then the moccasins to the right are much smaller, children's moccasins, probably Sioux Indian, somewhat further east than the northern Arapaho. Next slide, please. Now, can't see this very well, but it's really wonderful. And it's also sort of stereotypical. It's a peace pipe, right? It's, you know, within even 70 years ago, all the, you know, the B movies of the West with the cowboys and the Indians, you know, you'd usually see teepees sometimes, and you'd see peace pipes and peace ceremonies. But this pipe was smoked, and you can, actually, if you draw through the bowl of the pipe, you can taste the smoke from it's being smoked 150 years ago, or through the stem. And the bowl of the pipe is made out of a particular kind of stone mined in only one place in Minnesota. And the stone is called Catlinite, after the artist Catlin, who ended up in the 1830s in the West as an artist with military forces. And Catlin painted remarkable renderings of Mandan and Sioux and other Indians sort of in those early contact times. And he somehow got the mine where this kind of stone came from named after himself. So that stone is called Catlinite. And that Catlinite piece has bands into it that are recessed. There's a like carved recess and then lead bands, lead decoration. The stem itself has some horsehair hanging from it, but it also is wrapped in porcupine quill that is dyed red and blue and one or two other colors. Next slide, please.